I just want to start with thanking everybody because the conversations have been rich, and my ideas, I've got my own ideas on youth culture and how ministry should be done, my own experiences, and they've been challenged for very good reasons and very good conversations, and I hope that you will extend the same grace as I challenge some ideas with all of you today. I also have, what I want to do for you this morning is it's a collation of information. This is not research I've done on my own. What it is a collection of articles, research that has been done mostly in the US and some in Australia, just to give us an idea of some of the current realities of the rising generation. Now, what's interesting about all this is that it doesn't fit nicely together. It's not like everything is consistent across the board, but one of the things I hope that is happening here today is that in conversation we pick out the threads that are most significant, and we're able to see what God is doing and which lanes that we need to be in, so we optimize and we are acting where God is already acting. Because there's a lot of numbers out there. The stats can say whatever we want, pretty much, and so where's the wisdom in that? And so how we lean into it together. I'm going to start with two thoughts. You know this already, but allow me to set the stage just a little bit here. Young people are being discipled, influenced, shaped, formed by the world and environment they live in. It includes us when we were young. It includes the generations who are young now. And we are all, believe it or not, continuously being shaped and formed by the world we live in. The things that we agree with, the things that we don't agree with. And our reactions and responses to it are who we are, and we kind of live in this dynamic relationship with the generations that come thereafter. I am a firm believer that God is sovereign. He has not lost a generation, and he will not start now. God has birthed this young generation into this day and time because they are the best equipped. He has given them the latent desires, the characteristics that will be best suited for the world that is to come. Our job is to come along beside them. And so there is this phrase that was going around that was about, okay, so what if the dark ages come? Frankly, part of me is like, let them come. Only let us be prepared. The ebb and flow of history is not ours to decide, and sometimes obedience doesn't always lead to revival. It leads to the darkest times, because in the darkest times, people will know unequivocally who God is. And so that's where I stand on that. And so as we go through some of the stats here, again, it was mentioned in our Global Partners conversation, 1 Chronicles 12:32, I referenced it before as well, from Issachar, men who understood the times, men and women in our case, who understood the time and knew what Israel should do. 200 chiefs with all their relatives under their command. And so we do need men and women who are very aware and in tune with the times. We cannot be a bubble institution. The church needs to be engaged, the salt and light, and we need to be smart. Shrewd as serpent and as innocent as doves, and we haven't always been so. And so if we go to the Varkey Foundation, they kind of had this one phrase which will set the stage for some of the information that is coming up next. For Generation Z, I am Canadian, rapid change has been constant, yes, for the Commonwealth. There were static points in history, okay? There were points in history where change was very rapid because, for example, the Gutenberg press, and it just changed, but then there were extended points of static. Right? Now, no longer the case. There is a pace of change that's very rapid, and the Varkey Foundation says this is the first generation of digital natives who have grown up living in the profound human experiment of social media. We don't know where this is going to lead, how it's going to really shape. Like, somebody proposed the idea of digital at church to me, and I can't get my head wrapped around it. But they tell me that the young people who are connecting online forums with video gaming, it's real community for them. And so that's an interesting tension that we face, and in which our attitudes towards information, relationships, and privacy have greatly shifted. If we go to the next slide, I will go through some of these slides very quickly because you have them in your app and the slide deck is available. This is just the internet users over time. It had this increase, if you can see, this is the billions, right? So close to 2.2 billion in 2012, and by the time we get to 2022, we're talking close to 5 billion people. We're about just under 8 billion in the world, so we're talking a significant increase of internet users. When we go to the next slide, COVID definitely pushed all of us into the digital space where our young people are roaming free. This is their world, and we are invading it in many ways. And we're asking them, what's my email password? Like, I can't remember it. That's what my dad does to me, right? And I'm right? So there's that tension. They swim freely. We can learn from that. The digital space is their world. It is their home court advantage. And we need to leverage that and optimize that. It's just a tool. There's a lot of evil on there, but there's a lot of good. It's the same with all sorts of media, radio included, but we have Trans World Radio, these traditional forms of media that were innovative when they first came out. And so those stats, we probably fall all under the 54% of more streaming, right, during COVID. The next slide just is an overview of some essential digital headlines, just some numbers there. Again, you can look on your slide deck if this is going to go too fast, just to review some of this material. I do want to say, okay, well, let's go to the next slide first, and I'll make a quick comment here. The next slide just shows you some of the age breakdown. So 8 to 11-year-olds, there's a couple key stats here. 49% have their own kind of like smartphone. 12 to 15-year-olds, you're talking about 91% at that time. Close to 96%, 99% of the age groups here use video streaming platforms. Again, this is their home court. It's totally fine. It's just a world that we now need to get used to, because I still remember cassette players and pagers. Okay, so this is something that we're going to have to get used to. I also want to make a comment here. The convenience of the digital age does not make the generation lazy. It's like asking you to walk everywhere when you have a car, or do your laundry with, by hand. And so that's the mentality that we need to kind of switch ourselves to, because we have all these conveniences that our grandparents didn't have. The convenience of it always was, I used to do all my research in the library and the stacks. They go on Google. I'm like, well, that's their advantage, and that's something that the history has kind of unfolded. So let's give it to them and not have them go through things that we went through because they have to earn it. They have earned it. Humanity has earned it in many ways. If we move on to the next slide, it's a series of articles. I have at the end of the slide deck, there is a resource page so you can look them up. I'm just going to go through these very quickly and highlight some of the points that spoke to me. And of course, these are available to you to peruse for yourselves as well. Generation Z and religion, what the data shows. What I found interesting about this article that was published by Religion in Public was that African American Gen Zers report to have the highest rates of weekly church attendance. So one of the things we have to remember that the dominant millennial or Gen Z culture that is in mainstream does not represent all the cultures of the world. The millennial and the Gen Zers in China are radically different than the ones that are growing up here. It's not better or worse, it's just different. And so now in this global culture, how do we bring all those lanes together? Because God's church has generational continuity and diversity built into it, but we have not leveraged that at this point quite yet. When we also look at some of the other articles coming up, the state of religion and young people in 2021, navigating uncertainty. So one of the things we kind of talked about was the fact that relationship and authenticity is very important to the kids. Many young people prefer, this is the last point there, to confide in their family and friends rather than religious institutions during times of uncertainty or difficulty. And part of me says, can we blame them? One of the things that I've been struggling with is the continuous and consistent fall of evangelical leaders over the last several decades. It happens in Canada as well. And it is just this idea that the mission of the church is for people, but the institutions and the systems protect the individuals who have harmed people. It's inconsistent. And that is what a young generation cannot come on board with. And so here I am persuaded by history itself that the structures and systems of the past got us to where we are. And they did such an excellent job. I am not completely persuaded that that is the system and structures and institutions that we need in the future. So how do we rethink this together if the kids are leaving church? State of the Bible. There is no surprise that biblical illiteracy is increasing. People touch base with the Bible. They hear about what other people say about the Bible, whether it's Fox News, CNN, or some other commentator, but that is not what the Bible itself says. I was very convicted by what the gentleman who shared this morning said. And just because you know the Bible does not mean you know God either. So there's a lot of this tension going on. And the stat in this article that was moving to me was even fewer Gen Z American youth read their Bibles in 2020 in the midst of the racial injustice protests and the pandemic. This is something that means something to them, the racial injustice. And by my goodness, the Bible, God is a very social justice God. It leads on to salvation. It's not just about that issue, but he did always make space for the foreigner and the sojourner. It was Jesus who talked to the woman at the well. And the disciples were not for that. So there's something there that we need to understand about the values of the young generation. Reviving evangelism in the next generation, this is so interesting as well because we talk about the young generation being more spiritual probably, but maybe not religious because of the association with institutions and traditions. And so it was interesting to me to find that nearly 80% say that they've had a conversation about faith with somebody at least once in the past. I am a firm believer in Ecclesiastes 3:11. God has put eternity into the hearts of every human being. We are spiritual beings and there's a vacuum there. That is the loneliness and that is a difficulty that we encounter. And so we need to speak into that. I'm going to go over time, but I'm just going to do it. Sorry, Yuri. U.S. church membership down sharply in the past 2 decades. Again, not a surprise. It is static. It's institutionalized. It's a traditional religious institutions. On average, just 42% of millennials are members of churches. Does that mean something about their faith? It might correlate, but I dare say that they have communities beyond the traditional mainline churches, and maybe the polls themselves don't get into the nooks and crannies of where these young people are meeting. Some of the challenges of the current reality. This is something that I found very interesting, as finishing the task is all about reaching the unengaged and unreached people groups in the last and least parts of the world. 2 in 5 young American Christians ages between 18 and 14 believe that Christian mission is tainted by its association with colonialism. It is true. We are reckoning with that in Canadian spirituality, and rightly so. There was a lot of good and there was a lot of bad, and we do have to parse between the two. We cannot romanticize a missions movement. A lot of good. Korea was one of the nations that rose because of a lot of missions and the social work that they brought into our nation, but there was a lot of difficulty that came with that as well. 1 in 3 think missions work has been unethical in the past. There are supportive skeptics, so they know that there's something out there. And if you read that last blurb, it's no surprise, we've talked about it. They're more focused on social justice ministries, medical care, service to the poor. They want more empowerment of national indigenous leaders, and they do want us to be less pushy in terms of evangelism. So now how do we be less pushy and more winsome as we go about our business of sharing Christ? There are 7 encouraging trends of global Christianity. I will leave that to you to look at. I do want to focus on the next slide of the top youngest population countries in the world. These are this is the percentage of population under 18 years of age. Look at Nigeria. You're talking under 18 years old. It's interesting because when we look at where the UUPGs are, it is consistent. These nations are very close to where, in the same regions as to where the UUPGs are. And so the question that is before me, at least in my heart, is how do we create pathways? Because these nations tend to be the ones who don't have the same opportunities. It's an equity issue for leadership and spiritual growth. And so how do we create those pathways with our Western structures without asking them to give up their culture or their language? And these are some tough questions. I will also say this. There was a question that was asked in 2000. I was just getting out of high school, and it was at the Amsterdam Conference for World Evangelization. Some of you may remember this. Billy Graham ran this. And the question was, why is the Great Commission not finished in the 21st century? I am persuaded, you may not agree with me, but allow me to challenge your thinking. I am persuaded that it is because we have not made pathways for young women to become leaders. You have sidelined half the church, and you are flying with half a wing. And it's something that means a lot to me because, again, in some of the more traditional and non-Western cultures, women are not even educated. They're not allowed to drive. These are very low bars that we're asking for, but the church, I believe, should be different. It does not matter to me whether you're a complementarian or egalitarian. What I am asking for is to recognize what God has deposited into every human being. And so that is something that I just want to throw out at you to think about and mull about. Let's go over to some ideas, and I'll wrap up shortly here. Gen Z. This is research that was done by some people from down under. So thank you to our Australians. The students of our world today who are currently at school and university are the children of Gen Xers. And the cohort that follows Gen Y, and those who were born between 1995 and 2009, they are Gen Z. It's interesting here because you see the generational continuity. The baggage of the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys get passed down now to the millennials, the Gen Zs and the alphas. Okay? And so that's something that we have to consider, because we can't just look at them and what's their problem? What is the baggage that we also brought, the good and the bad? The more self-aware we are, we will know our failings and we will be able to meet them where they're at, and also say this is where we fall short, and we're authentic and honest about that. You'll be surprised at how much they know we're not perfect. Gen Alpha. Following our Gen Zs, or our preschooler and kindergartners, some of you have children this age of today, Gen Alpha. They're born since the year of 2010. They're the children of millennials. And so the characteristics of millennials, their parenting or their ideas of the world, how does that affect the young people? What was interesting was that last sentence there. They are the most materially endowed and technologically literate generation ever to grace the planet. And I love how they worded that. Materially endowed does not mean spoiled. It is a logical fallacy. Just because they have the resources that we do not have, I say we leverage it for the kingdom. Let them be. There are two final thoughts that three final slides, but two emerging classes that I want to mention. There are the precariat class and the digital nomads. The precariat class, let me define this for you, is a social class of people who comprise people who are in state of precarity, which is a condition of existence without predictability or security. And so basically these are people who are delivering jobs. They have several jobs. These tend to be individuals who are in developing countries. So geopolitics affects the precariat class. They are rising. You're talking about the marginalized in Hong Kong, for example. You're talking about Southeast Asia. You're talking about people who are trying to get out of, for example, sex slave trade, but they're having to kind of navigate all this. Many of them are women. Many of them are young people. And so this class is an emerging class. And how do we deal with this? Guy Standing is actually a secular writer, but he really has a great book that warns that the growth of this class can produce instabilities in society. You see some uprisings in Iran these days. And so all this young class that is very restless, they are the precariat class, and they're looking for some stability in this world. We also have the digital nomads, work from anywhere. I think most of you are familiar with that term. So let me just end with this final slide. There's the song. 2 Kings 2. This is a quick story about Elijah and Elisha. And when Elisha is following Elijah around, they go to Bethel, Jericho, and Jordan. And Elijah asks Elisha, what is it that I can do for you? And he says, I want a double portion of your spirit. And Elijah looks at him and he recognizes that that is not his to give nor deny. So good on Elisha for stating what he wants. Why can't our kids be double better than we are? Good on Elijah for saying this is God's to give. That's my time. Nicole, you're up next.